Hi everyone, this is your host Annie Zhang, and this is Hello Metaverse. The creator economy, crypto, and the metaverse have probably been the buzziest concepts of this year, or in tech at least. And Kyla Scanlon straddles all three of these worlds on a visceral level. She is a content creator who focuses on financial education, which entails explaining to people hard-to-grasp concepts like crypto and other vehicles for decentralization. And by being a creator, she naturally occupies a majority of her life in the online world, aka the metaverse. As a Gen Z, or as she'd like to say, a Cusper, which are basically Gen Z folks on the cusp of being a millennial, and an online creator, she has forged a livelihood online through her work, and as a result, has made many rich relationships with people online, even more so than offline. In her own words, she is a prototype for the concepts that she creates content around. This is what made my conversation with her so interesting and meta. Foremost as an educator, Kyla explains and unbundles difficult Web3 concepts such as DAOs, NFTs, social tokens, and Defi. From her creator perspective, she explores how these emergent concepts directly impact her life and her work. Finally, as a Gen Z, she muses about why these concepts, especially this desire for decentralization, are emerging for her generation and what it might be a cultural reaction to. We explore some very real issues for Gen Z, such as the growing sense of loneliness, the dark and exhausting elements of creator culture, and the repercussions of growing up with information overload and no room for processing and introspection. A bit more about Kyla: she started options trading in high school, and previous to what she's doing now, she worked at Capital Group and was a participant in the TAP program. Beyond being a financial content creator and educator, she is now building a financial education company to onboard people to the world of investing. As a disclosure, all opinions and points of view in this podcast are my own. It does not represent the views of Roblox, my current employer, and is not affiliated with the company. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Kyla Scanlon. You've been a creator since you're in your teens. Can you tell us a little bit about what prompted you to start being a creator, and how has this experience so far shaped your understanding of the world, as well as the different economic opportunities that are available for you and your generation?
So I started trading options when I was in high school, and I'm from Kentucky, and there aren't a lot of people trading options in Kentucky. And I was like, okay, so I'll start writing online about options trading, because that was like my way into the universe. And so I started doing that and went to school and wrote for like various news outlets about finance, and then went to work for Capital Group, which is an asset management firm, and was under compliance. So like had to stop creating. And then I ended up leaving them earlier this year and started doing TikToks around December. And then once I left them, I started doing the finance TikToks, and it's been really fun because you get to reflect on a lot of stuff, because you have to like this feedback loop, right? So like you have to process a lot of things and then put it out into the world, and people will respond to it, and you just learn a lot that way. But economic opportunity wise, I think that the creator economy is on this like really weird cusp of growth. Like I don't know if it's going to be really, really good or really, really bad. I'm still iterating on that thesis, but like the whole thing is creators are probably like the first decentralized workers. And so I think just exploring that and sort of being like a prototype for that has been interesting.
That's awesome. In some ways, I feel like the generation, I guess Gen Z, a little bit of millennials as well, there's almost like an insurgence of power. The fact that you're still a young creator and you have a ton of followers online, and people might actually be reading your financial pieces over legitimate news outlets. What does that mean to you? Does it feel like it's just a contrived notion right now, or is that shift in power actually happening?
I think everybody's still trying to figure out what it means to be a creator. Like, are we disrupting news? Are we disrupting education? Are we disrupting anything? And so for me, like a lot of people on my TikTok will be like, I'd rather listen to you than CNBC because you explain things in a more tangible, accessible way. I think like you have to be really careful who you get your information from, and creators are able to build a certain level of trust with their audience because it's just you and them interfacing and you're in the comments and stuff like that. So I think that people inherently trust them a little bit more because they get to see them pretty raw, like you're just like filming in your room, versus like a news outlet where it's very organized, it's very sterile almost. And so I think there's just a level of authenticity that comes with creators and the content that they produce.
I feel that too. Every time I watch your videos, I'm like, is this a lifestyle video or is this actually like educating me on some really, really esoteric topics? So you mentioned you're on TikTok, but you're also on a bunch of other platforms. You have a Substack, a YouTube channel, podcast, all of that. What does it mean to have a presence on all of these different platforms? Have you seen any insights of how one works a little bit differently than others? And as a creator right now, do you feel like you have to maintain all of it, or can you actually focus?
The way that I think about my work stream is I'll like write a research paper. So I'll write a Substack article and then I'll turn that into YouTube and then I'll clip that up into a TikTok. And then I post daily, almost daily on TikTok about like just different things like the debt ceiling or like what is the metaverse, like just like whatever is sort of top of mind that day in the news cycle. And then I also do like skit style stuff on TikTok. And then I have a sort of a podcast where I just clip out my YouTubes, but trying to turn that into something a little bit more tangible for people. So yeah, I exist across a lot of different mediums. I'm on Twitter. For me, it's kind of like, okay, so it makes a lot more sense to like have like a lot of breadth, just really go really wide on a lot of stuff. I'm a generalist, right, at the end of the day with most of my content. So it's like, I'm not going to niche down into YouTube or TikTok because that doesn't feel like what I need to do right now. Like I really want to meet people where they need me. And that comes with like creating audio, that comes with creating videos, that comes with like writing stuff, because you try to hit everybody at where they learn best. So like some people really love to read and it's like, okay, I'll make content for them. So like at the end of the day, it's just like what my audience needs from me. And like right now, there isn't any one platform like, oh my gosh, like it would be such a waste of time for me to focus on anything else but this. Everything else is sort of just, it's moving at a momentum pretty evenly across all of them, which is nice.
Yeah, I really like that approach. And I feel like it's a general thing for creators where it's much more responsive towards audiences and what their needs are. And there's way quicker feedback loop. If you're the New York Times, you know, they are very innovative. They have podcasts and stuff, but it's a whole entire new business branch that they have to put out if they want to change things a little bit. Let's take a step back and get a little bit high level. So you actually have a pretty large financial background that you come from. You're recently an investment partner at On Deck as well. And obviously you know a lot about financial strategy, macroeconomics, etc. Can you tell me how that's informed your various interests? So like obviously you write about finance, now you're really into crypto as well as the metaverse. Where did that come from?
So it kind of stems back from like the options trading in high school and just like what was money. Like I was just really fascinated by that concept of money and like how do you get it? What does it mean? Because I felt like if you could solve for money, you could essentially solve for anything. So I guess like my financial background was like, what is money? Like if you can solve for money, if you can help other people figure out money, surely that'll do something. Like at the end of the day, that seems to be like a baseline level need that we all have is like, how do you have enough money? How do you have enough like passive income so you can sort of pursue your hopes and dreams? And the way that I started thinking about my content was like institutions often gatekeep certain things. So like they're like, well, you know, we're an institution, we know a lot better than you, so we're not going to like tell you everything that you might need to know in order to invest. Like investing is not the most difficult thing in the world, but there's a lot of barriers to just even like that first step that people need to take in order to onboard. So that's what I try to solve for is like, how do we get more people just onboarded in the system almost in a more sustainable way?
Yeah, totally. And how did that lend itself to your interest in crypto, which is obviously very, very related, and then also move that upstream to metaverse related stuff too? Like, how does that financial seed make its way upstream to all of these other novel emergent topics?
I like to consider myself an educator, and I hope other people see me that way too, but I'm also a learner. Like I'm 24. And so the idea that I know everything is sort of wrong. So like, I figure if I just learn everything, I can like bring other people on my journey. So honestly, half of my content is me just like teaching myself what a DAO is. And I'm like, okay, so other people can probably benefit from me like figuring it out and I'll share with them. And then with the metaverse, I really like technology and really like new stuff. And so I was like, okay, this is like really cool. And this is probably the future. Like I think crypto, if not the future, it has a big component of our future. It makes a lot of sense to study this stuff because it's taken off so much and it's really fascinating. Like, it's just a new economic structure.
Awesome. Well, speaking of which, you being an educator, you being really, really good at explaining hard concepts to people, should we dive into some of these things and talk more about what they are? Why don't we start with DAOs? That's becoming a really hot topic within the Web3 conversation. Talk to us about what it is, what it means for organizations.
Yeah, so a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization, and it's essentially like a corporation but unbundled. So rather than like having 5 guys in a boardroom somewhere making all the decisions, it's going to be the community making the decisions, and they do that through voting. So like somebody would be like, oh, like we want the DAO to go invest in like an art piece, and so somebody would submit that proposal. The DAO would be like, okay, yes, we want to do that. Yes, no, we don't, and then they would move forward with that based on the amount of people who did vote versus who didn't. So at a like really high level, it's just structured to be a different way for people to interact. And DAOs can act as a lot of different types of economic entities. So you'll have like investing DAOs. So like the example I just gave about investing in an NFT, that's one type of DAO. There's like grant DAOs, there's collector DAOs, which are sort of like similar to investing DAOs. And then you have a lot of corporations, interestingly enough, who are like spinning out their own DAOs. So like Bankless has a DAO, so they're a crypto media company, they have their own DAO. The way that I think about it, like a super high level, is it's a way for stakeholders in companies or people who are interested in like governing a company to get more involved. Like if I had a DAO, like people would be like, Kyla, like we're gonna vote for you to make content about just Jerome Powell. And like they could submit that proposal, and based on what the community wants, like that's what could move forward. So it's just like at high level, it's just community corporation.
Let's talk a little bit about the flaws or potential downsides to DAOs. It feels a little bit inefficient. How do you actually get to a consensus? That's one of the biggest questions that I have is if there is a Kyla DAO and we are voting for you to do a specific topic literally next week, how are people going to actually align to that?
Yeah, I think that's like one of the hard parts about DAOs. That's something I've been thinking a lot about because like I like humans, but I don't think that they're always like majority rule is not always the best thing. You can see it in Congress right now with the debt ceiling. That's kind of the hard part. And then also like who is in charge of decentralization? So I think it's like, what if the DAO makes a bad vote? How do you sort of back out of that? How do you get fired from a DAO? Like that was a Twitter meme a while ago. People are just trying to solve for that right now. Is decentralized governance the best way to run something? And eGirl Capital wrote this really good paper called Self-Sovereign Symbiosis that was just talking about what does it actually mean to have a decentralized structure at like the super high level. So like if the United States was decentralized, what does that mean for how it operates? What does it mean for how it makes decisions? Is that really the best thing for the operational structure of a country or a corporation? Yeah.
What do you think is a really good example of a use case where a decentralized organization is actually strong?
Yeah, I mean, I think like collector DAOs and investor DAOs are really interesting because that's essentially a fund, right? So like you're like, okay, like we want to invest in this NFT piece, or we want to invest in this creator, and like we're going to pull our money together and go do that. Like I think that sort of stuff is really neat because that way you're able to operate as an entity versus like how you would have to do it now. It's like I don't even know how you would sort of like get money. I guess you'd pull your money together with your friends and be like, okay, we're going to go collectively buy this piece. But you can sort of fractionalize that piece out too. Like so you would get an NFT, you could fractionalize it, and everybody would have ownership over that. So I think like if you're trying to solve for the concept of ownership, whether that be through just investing in other DAOs, like investing in NFTs, I see a lot of application there. But I think when it comes to like policy, that's where it can get a little hairy.
Yeah, it almost feels like there has to be some sort of a common interest that's quite strong aligning this set of people together. And then maybe decisions have to be a little bit more black or white. It's like, are we going to get this or not? Are we going to purchase this or not? Not quite complex as like, hey, like, what do we think the future of New York City planning should be?
There's a DAO that is trying to disrupt McKinsey. And I thought,
really?
Yeah. And I was like, how would that work? Like at a super high level.
Like what disrupt in what way?
Like replace them as a consulting firm.
Okay.
Yeah. And so like do that through this like decentralized ownership of, I guess, the content and sort of how they do things. So like you would be in charge of, I don't know, putting together a deck or like sort of solving something, and you would kind of collect all those assets into this DAO. I think like DAOs really work well to solve ownership, but I just wonder from an operational perspective. But that being said, I think they're new, right? So
totally.
They're a learning curve for everybody. Yeah,
definitely. Okay, well, maybe let's move on to NFTs. Tell us what they are and what are some of the most interesting components of NFTs that you see as a creator, as well as like somebody who's just interested in finance.
So NFTs are non-fungible tokens, and they're really interesting because they do a couple different things. So like you can make art out of NFTs, you can collect assets in an NFT. Like it's just a different way to like pass on ownership. I think the really interesting application and what it's most widely known for is for art. There's a guy named Shloms on Twitter, and I think it was Duchamp. I probably said that name wrong, but he did like a toilet art piece back in the 1970s, and Shloms was like, oh, I'm going to do that same thing. And he did that. So he like broke a toilet apart in a dark basement somewhere, and he sold the parts of the toilet NFT style. So like he fractionalized these parts of the toilet and people bid on them. And you bid for this. It's a pointer to an asset. So like a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to copy paste and I have your NFT. But the NFT itself is more the pointer to the picture. It's not the picture itself. So that's where a lot of people kind of get confused, I think. And so he did that, and the project did really well. There was another project that I was involved in that was like a dice NFT. So like it's really interesting how people assign value to NFTs. So like on this one, which dice roll would be like most rare? Like would you get snake eyes? How does that work? That's how the value of that project came out. And then there was another one, the tulip NFT project, where it was just like the NFTs of tulips, but it was a scavenger hunt. So you would collect different NFTs from different people along the scavenger hunt, and it was intertwined with the physical world because you had to go take a picture at like all of these places. The location itself of whatever people were trying to solve for was built into the metadata, so like built into the NFT code itself. So you had to like unlock that, and you would do that through like different passphrases on OpenSea. That was a really interesting project as well. But I think at a really high level, NFTs are a great way for people to monetize their work, and we haven't really solved for that yet. Like there's still like the narrative of the starving artist, but I think that NFTs are enabling people to really put their work online and really have ownership over that too. So for me, and like how I think about them, I have a lot of TikToks that exist on TikTok's platform. Are they my TikToks or are they TikTok? Like who owns my TikToks, right? Because if they exist on TikTok's platform, theoretically it'd be them. And so I can like download them and put them in NFT format, and they're mine now. That's kind of how you can think of it from an ownership perspective. And then like a monetization perspective, people would bid on it and they would say, oh, I value this a lot and I'm going to buy it for a lot of money. Or they say, I don't value this at all, so I'm not going to bid on it. But NFTs are in a little bit of a bubble right now, I'd say. Or they were. It's sort of normalizing.
Yeah, agreed. I want to anchor on this point for a second where you're like, hey, a TikTok video that I produce right now is owned by TikTok, but I can download it and then convert that into an NFT. Explain to us, how does that actually work? Because in some ways, like TikTok still owns that, right? And they still own the distribution of it, at least within their own platform. And then I guess you could say like, hey, I obviously have the original video of that and I could make that into an NFT, but what would that provide for the NFT owner if they actually bought that? They don't own the thing on TikTok, and TikTok would never say that you own the video itself. So what is the value of having that NFT then? And does that in return provide you value too?
Yeah. I mean, so I think with the videos, it's sort of like art. So people would be like, oh my God, this was a piece of art and I'm going to buy it from you. So it'd be just an additional way to monetize. For me, it's really hard as a creator because the platforms have so much power. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's just a different way to unbundle the power of the platform. So rather than TikTok, like literally owning everything and being able to like knock your video down, say, oh, this is under review. Oh my God, he talks about crypto. Like we're going to knock it down. It would be just a way for you to actually like have a little bit of ownership over the property that you produce, over the intellectual property that you have existing on the blockchain. Like you can have different contracts, so like real estate agreements can go through the blockchain. There's a company that's disrupting mortgages and they're executing mortgage papers through the blockchain. So like just that cryptographic key that gives you like access to all the data and you're like, okay, yes, I understand, like your credit score is good, like you're good to go. And that's another interesting application too. So I think circling back to the main point, it's just a different way for you to verify ownership of this stuff.
When I think about NFT today and like the creator NFTs, especially your TikTok video or Jack Dorsey's first tweet, there's kind of that satisfaction of owning that NFT and saying like, I have proof that I own that NFT. But I feel like the thing that's lacking is the payout part of it. How can I keep on reaping the rewards of actually owning that NFT? Because the most ideal world is you literally do own in its totality this TikTok video. And then in some way, every single view, every single whatever share, you get a percentage of that payout. I'm guessing that is not going to ever happen on TikTok, but are there emergent technologies or platforms that are trying to do that in some way? And are they seeing any success?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's trying to solve for like the monetization aspect of the creator economy. I'm sure there's one out there and I just haven't seen it, but like I haven't seen a particular platform that is like, oh, we'll pay you for a certain number of views unless like YouTube does a pretty good job. I think with NFTs and sort of like the value there, it would just be like how it trades in the market. There's a lot of different NFT projects that are like, oh, we'll pay you dividends. If you pull all this money together, essentially go and stake it and like can earn yield that way. And then they would pay that yield back out to the owners. That's a different way to make money on it. But with the NFTs of the TikToks, it would be like, okay, somebody one day probably has to value that more than the person who bought it originally. And that's kind of the hard part is like, how does this stuff trade? How is it liquid? That's something to still be solved for.
Interesting. Yeah. I feel like my take is there's kind of a new asset class that we're starting to introduce and the underlying protocol is being updated, but the contexts in which something gets shown or something starts to attribute or gain value, it's still very outdated Web 2 products. The asset itself could be Web 3, it's an NFT, but it's still kind of trapped in a Web 2 world where like there's a centralized distributor of all this content. So maybe it's just a matter of time, to be honest.
I think about that a lot. If you think about it, everything is built on the back of the internet, which is like a centralized entity, right?
Yeah.
And if somebody pulls the plug on that, like all this is gone. And so I think about that a lot. Like, how do you have a decentralized product that exists within a centralized entity? To your point on like how all this stuff is going to proceed, what does it actually mean to like as we like go on to OpenSea, which is like a website, what does that mean for ownership? And like, it's super interesting. And I think to an earlier point that I made, what does decentralization actually look like and how does that manifest? So I think that's like the hard part. And also like ownership. Do you need to monetize every single aspect of what you do? Or is there a better way to pay people? I think the whole way that we think about economic structures is probably going to your point, going to shift. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this is a good segue to maybe social tokens or this concept of monetizing every aspect of yourself as a creator. We've sort of talked about this offline where at any point you could tokenize something about you or something about what you do, and then it becomes something that you make money from. But at the same time, it could be exhausting, right? At what point is there a boundary between what you're able to sell and what you don't want to sell and how much you want to be on versus not on? So explain maybe the concept of social tokens a little bit, and then like the more greater concept, which is just making every part of you monetizable.
Yeah, so social tokens are essentially like there would be a token, and like Alex Coin is probably the most famous example, where it's this creator named Alex, and he was like, okay, I'm going to make a token, and if you want to invest in me, you invest in this token. So it's kind of like developing, to use a traditional finance example, like having a stock around yourself. So you're like, okay, everybody, like I'm going to launch this token. You can buy these tokens if you want to, and you can invest in me that way. So it's like a creator cap table or like a token cap table where people can invest in you, to the point of monetization and having every aspect of your self monetize. Like that's literally you monetizing like your entire existence. But I think for creators, and I'm a finance content creator, not a lifestyle content creator, it can be tough, I think, especially for like lifestyle content creators. And you see a lot of burnout and a lot of fatigue because you're just always doing your life and people are always passing judgment on your life. And so I think for me, I'm sort of lucky because I just do finance videos. My audience doesn't really know a whole lot about me as Kyla the person. I keep my personal life pretty quiet, just because I'm an introvert, so I need that time away. But yeah, the big question is like, is it healthy to monetize every aspect of you? Is it healthy to monetize your hobbies? Because that's what we've sort of ended up doing, is like every single thing that you do, you should make money from it. And like that's sort of the structure that crypto has. It's like, okay, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and we're going to make money from that, and everything ever is going to be monetizable. And I think that could be really not good in the long run.
Yeah, it feels like it was first a backlash towards corporate culture, right? People did not want to go to the office like 9 to 5. They didn't want to do what other people told them to do. They wanted to be more expressive. But now I'm definitely seeing this lifestyle of creators just being absolutely exhausting. And especially your point about being a lifestyle creator, everything that is fun about your life now has to be something that becomes work, which in itself sounds a little bit dark too. Do you already see a little bit of a shift from this, or like there's some sort of a burnout from this kind of lifestyle, and are people craving normal jobs? What are you seeing with a lot of mature creators, and how do they feel about their jobs today?
So I'm still a baby creator. I have not been doing this as long. People say if you can make it past the 2-year mark, that's when you're like really a creator. So there's a crop of TikTokers that, you know, during the pandemic, they're like, okay, I'm going to like start doing this in my life. I'm going to like film stuff. I'm going to make content about like me as a person. And they got a lot of followers because that's what TikTok is really good at. And on YouTube, same thing. And now I think you just see a little bit of exhaustion, because the comments can be really tough sometimes. And like people are like, oh, like you shouldn't be living your life that way. Oh, that's stupid that you bought that. Or, oh, that's stupid that you live there. When you monetize every aspect of your life in this really public fashion, you really open yourself up to criticism. And so I think that's like honestly probably the most exhausting part for people, is just like I think it's the Truman Show.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It's like that.
Oh my God, you're totally right. It was super dark. I mean, it was an incredible movie, but the fact that you just called it out, I'm like having a moment of realization. Like, that's pretty dark.
Yeah.
And cynical.
Yeah. I mean, and that's sort of probably like a pessimist. Like I love making content. Like I think it's great, and I'm so lucky to be able to do it. So lucky. But I do think that it's just you in a little room filming, and that is incredibly lonely, and nobody gets it. I'm in a couple of like creator group chats, and we're like, oh my God, like this brand, or oh my God, this like the platform took me down again, and you're just like fighting for your life sometimes. And if you're doing it full time, you kill what you eat, or eat what you kill, and that can be tiring too, because you don't have that steadiness. So I do think, to your question, I think a cool application of DAOs could be pulling together a bunch of creators. People invest money in sort of like that creator fund, and they're like, okay, we're going to cover your basic needs. And that could be like a really interesting model. But yeah, I think that the uncertainty, the interfacing with everybody all the time can just be a lot.
This is actually a great transition to thinking about how much your life as a creator now is purely digital versus like being offline in any way, and maybe even segueing to metaverse-y conversations. So my belief around this conversation around the metaverse and like why it's valuable is that there is this belief that most of our lives are going to be in the online world, or there is going to be a very separate life that you build that do not have to be connected with any of the things that are happening in the offline world, in which you can thrive in, or in which you can build continuity in. The first question, not jumping to the metaverse, but just your life right now, or a lot of people like you, do you feel like your life is just on the online and there's not that much of a presence offline? And even if Kyla did not exist in real life, you would still be perfectly fine? Or do you think it's still pretty well balanced at this point?
A lot of my life is online. It's kind of funny, like most of my friends are from the online now. Like I still have a lot of friends who exist in real life, but a lot of my really good friends I've made online through like Discord channels or through Twitter, and my entire livelihood is online. My videos, everything. I think, to your point, how do you separate that? I don't know. Like, I'm still a physical person, and I was in New York this past couple weeks, and I met a lot of people in real life, and that was interesting. So I think that there's serendipity that exists offline, but most of myself is online.
Damn. And if you don't mind me asking, these relationships that you form online, is there a clear difference to how they are compared to like your offline friends and how those relationships formed? Is it typically for something specific? So like a creator support group where like you actually need the help of other people who are doing similar things to you? Or do you feel like you're developing genuine friendships and relationships online?
So I look to a lot of people for like mentorship and guidance, because I don't have that built in right now. So I just like talk to a lot of people about what they do and how they do it. And then to the genuine friendship perspective, I think I've made some of my best friends online, just because you run in the same circles. Like, you kind of know the drama. You're on the same wavelength. For somebody who exists so much online like myself, it's really hard to explain sort of what I do to my non-online friends. Like, some of my friends don't even have socials, and they're like, what? You make TikToks? That doesn't even make sense. There's a certain level of understanding and comprehension that comes from people who share that space with you.
It's crazy to hear that your life in many ways is digitally native. I guess I could say that for myself too, where like my entire work is online, but I do get to see these people offline. There is a physical space that pulls us together, but I think more and more that's going to disappear for people. Let's talk about the metaverse. So how did you get fascinated with the space? What is your own personal definition of what that is right now? And what are you seeing as like macro trends that are interesting to you?
I actually got interested in the metaverse because I was really into Roblox. Like, Roblox is one of my favorite companies.
Yay, Roblox.
Yeah, shout out. So I wrote a paper about Roblox, and then I was like, wow, like this metaverse thing could be like super, super cool. And then Facebook started leaning into it a little bit more. And so to me, the metaverse is like this virtual physical reality where learning wise, you're able to engage so much more. You're able to respond to so much more stimuli because it's so much more interactive. And then I think from like a collaboration and from like a meeting people, community building, cohesiveness, there's just going to be a lot more serendipity that comes from removing that 2D layer that we currently interact through.
And do you think that 3D layer is actually important? I mean, you talk about being on Discord channels or whatever other ways that you're meeting people online, like Twitter is huge. What would change if that was in a 3D? It's very easy to just scroll through a feed and tap twice to like a video, but it's very different to be like, hey, I'm gonna like enter into this room and I'm gonna like walk around in order to talk to people and whatnot.
So I think we have information overload right now where it's too easy to scroll. It's too easy to consume a lot of information. We don't have information synthesis. We just have information consumption. So I think the metaverse is going to do a lot for people to actually like process what they want to consume. I've noticed this with my generation is like nobody really knows what their deep passions are because there's so much stimuli all the time. And it's like, oh, I got to respond to this. I got to do that. And then you turn 24 and you're having a quarter life crisis because you're like, I'm in this job and I don't know what I care about because you've had so much stuff thrown at you all your life in terms of information. And so I think what the metaverse can do really well, hopefully, is like people will actually be immersed in stuff. Your brain is going to respond so much faster to that and be like, oh, you know, I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in that concept because you're able to synthesize it so much deeper.
Wow, that is actually a fascinating approach. I'm glad that you're validating it because I'm more of a millennial and we always like make jokes about Gen Z. And the one thing is they just don't know how to really fix things because you never have to learn how to fix things. You just Google it. But that perspective of not even knowing what you want because information is just completely surging at you is pretty insane. How would you say that has defined the generation? I mean, like when it does come to career decisions or where you want to live and these major life decisions, how do people go about it? Is it just on a whim? Or is like a very socially oriented?
So I'm a Cusper. Somebody called me that the other day. So like I just turned 24. For my age cohort, we are kind of all like pretty lonely, I think. And I think that's because we grew up in this online space and had to operate in sort of these silos. So I think a lot of people tend to have like a really strong core group, but you would I mean, I'm surprised at like the amount of people that are like, yeah, I don't have any close friends. And so I think a lot of people sort of make decisions based on what they think they're supposed to do based on like this 9-to-5 corporate life. But I think there's increasing dissent with that system because it's like, well, I can do 9-to-5 corporate life, but I'm not going to have any retirement money left because I cannot afford my life. There's just not a really great infrastructure in place for like making these decisions. We know how to like, you know, solve for the area of a triangle, but we don't know how to like process these art taxes. There's just a big gap in terms of what we do versus what we need to know in school. And that carries over into like, how do I actually live a life? Because the learning curve is super steep. Like, how do you move? Who do you call? How do you get healthcare? Like that kind of stuff.
Speaking of loneliness and mental health, if you were to propose certain things that people should consider as they start to build technology and build user experiences around the metaverse or whatever future products are actually suitable for this next generation, what are some of the key things that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So mental health is super important to me, just like as a creator, because a lot of us struggle with it, I think. I think everybody struggles with it. And like anxiety, depression, it's super hard to get your hands around that. And I think to the point about information stimuli, I think that we just have had so much thrown at us and we see all this stuff all the time online. And so I think there just needs to be not filtering for the events that happen, but just more frameworks in place for like, how do you process this stuff? If there's a global pandemic, how do you process a global pandemic? There's not any tools or support systems for people to be like, wow, like it's super crazy that we just lost a year of our lives. And not only did we lose a year of our lives, but we also lost like so many people. So I think there just needs to be more frameworks in place for people to actually process the information that's being thrown at them versus just like having everything saturate.
That's a really good point. Anything else when it comes to even like shifts in the education system? Because I know you care a lot about that.
Yeah. So I'm building a company in the financial education space. So like it's something I think very, very deeply about is like, how do you educate properly? A lot of times we assume that people have this baseline level of knowledge. So like you're in third grade, your teacher already assumes that you know addition. But if you're in third grade and you haven't learned addition yet, or it didn't stick with you the right way, you're going to feel stupid the rest of your life because you have this like really big gap in your learning comprehension. And so you just feel constantly left behind. So I think that we need to really make sure that foundations are strong in the education system and really make sure that we're like onboarding people at the point that they need to be onboarded at and sort of making it really personalized and meeting people where they need to learn. So like maybe you don't learn from like lecture style stuff. Maybe you learn more from audio. Maybe you learn from consuming books. So I think we just need to have more optionality around how people engage with information and how they educate themselves and how they interact with that moving forward.
Yeah, I really like that. It's so true that once you miss something, you just kind of like being dragged by society, right? And you're just pain. What is a tangible example of how people are doing that or how you felt like your content have actually been able to help people?
For me, I repeat stuff a lot, and I'll repeat concepts and I'll draw analogies. When the stock market is green, I'll be like, it was photosynthesizing. So people kind of like catch on. They're like, it's growing, it's doing good. You just have to create these anchors for people to have these lower concepts buried into themselves. The more times that you can give people the opportunity to grab onto information, but present it in a different format. Like every single day, I'm not going to be like, market photosynthesized because stocks went up. I'm going to be like, it photosynthesized because like the government fixed the debt ceiling and they figured out Apple had great earnings. So like they're able to draw the different variables back to that main anchor and be like, oh, actually everything feeds into this one point. And if I understand that one point better, then I can extrapolate that to other examples. That's how I think about it. It's like you have to anchor people to these really foundational concepts and give them the ladder to go to the next level so they understand like where they're coming from and where they need to go with that data.
Yeah, I love that. I do that all the time too, where like I could read something over and over again and I'll just never remember. And then I'll like sit myself down and I'll just like say the sentence a few times and then it just clicks. I want to cover one more topic that's a slight deviant from what we're talking about, but DeFi. I actually know very little about DeFi, so explain what really DeFi consists of. What does it mean for the future of finance for the next generation?
DeFi is super cool. So it's decentralized finance. It's very, very complex. Dave White from Paradigm has a bunch of really good papers on this subject. The stuff that he writes about is just insane. They are sort of gamifying and like hacking into like how we think about interest rates and how we think about liquidity and how we think about tokenization. So when you think about traditional finance, you put your money in a bank and you get some little bit of yield. But in DeFi, like the way that they structure it is you're able to get so much more yield because there's so much more money flowing in and out. They can lock stuff up. So you can lock up like liquidity pools. It's a way for financial systems to not be tied to this centralized exchange. So like you and I, if we wanted to like make a trade together, like I would be like, hey, do you want to buy my Apple stock? You would say yes, I would sell it to you. But with DeFi, it's a little bit more broader than that. And it's a little bit more interactive. The system is sort of built around the user versus the user having to like integrate into the system.
What would be an example?
When you think about sort of the interest rate environment, you can say like, oh, I'm going to go put some money away and I'm going to lock it up in this liquidity pool and they're going to lend that money out. So you'll go to Coinbase, for example. You'll say, Coinbase, I want to lock up my money and I'm going to lock it up with you. And you're going to go and lend out that money to other people. So it's kind of like collateralization, right? And you're going to get a percentage of the yield that they get from lending it out to other people. And that's what banks do, but it's like a whole different level, the way that they do it, because there's like different risk levels. So you could lend it to a more risky project or Coinbase could. So it's just a different way for stuff to be monetized from like that baseline level.
That's fascinating. Yeah. We explored so many topics and this has been eye-opening. I kind of want you to help summarize two things. So decentralization as a concept, what does it mean for your generation or people that you know? And why is it so significant or important? Or do people even care, right? Or is it just kind of like a buzzword right now? And then what should other generations try to understand why this is happening in the markets, just as a cultural backlash or a cultural response to something?
So I think decentralization is just a different style of governance. So like the way that I think about it is you have China with the Common Prosperity Plan, like all the way on one side of the normal distribution. So they're like, okay, we really want people to be involved with China, the nation state. Like we really want people to sort of respond to this idea of like everything for all. And then on the other side of the distribution, you would have crypto. So crypto is entirely decentralized. There's not like one governing body that's like making all the decisions. That's interesting because we've sort of lived in this decentralized internet society where nobody has been making the decisions for people sort of like on the internet. Everything has sort of been collectively built by a community. And so it's just a community owned property. And I think it's interesting from a generational perspective and also just like a human perspective, because after the Industrial Revolution, we were so individualistic. But I think now we're sort of returning to these communal structures that maybe are inherent in our DNA. Maybe we're meant to sort of govern as a community. I think that we've always had like quote unquote tribes, and those still exist obviously, but like tribal leadership could be an interesting model where you do kind of have a head honcho, but also like you have more of a board of directors and the community is more involved with making decisions. For this generation, they're really disillusioned with how stuff works, rightly so. And this is just a different optionality around like, well, actually, maybe it doesn't make sense for like 85-year-old people in Congress who don't know what Finsta is to be making like governance laws around Instagram. And I think other generations are also, you know, more or less disillusioned with the system. The system just isn't working the way that it's meant to anymore. And this is a thesis that I'm working on. Is it the decline of the Roman Republic? maybe that's what's going to happen.
Can you elaborate a little bit more?
Rome worked until it didn't, right? And then you kind of had the fall of the Republic just because like things weren't governed in the way that they were meant to be governed. And I think for me, like the starkest example right now is what's happening with the debt ceiling. So every couple of years this happens where we have the debt ceiling. We're like, okay, we've accrued all this debt. We should pay for it probably. But they're like, oh no, we don't want to pay for it. We have too much debt and we're not going to be able to operate until we get this debt ceiling stuff figured out. And so you have Republicans and Democrats like going head up against each other. Republicans are like, oh no, we want to be really careful about how we spend money. And then you have the Democrats who are like, well, to a certain extent, we have to spend money because that's what a government is designed to do. And they're just like butting heads and not dealing with this national debt. And so if the US does default on its debt, the US dollar could be really bad. Also, other countries would not trust us as much. And it would just be a really big sign that the government is actually like purely dysfunctional and it's not able to sort of do like a baseline level of governance. If you think back to the Roman Republic, it's really similar to that, just not being able to function as a governing society. So I think that's what a lot of people worry about is you can flourish until you don't, and the United States might be there.
To what extent do you think we have some solutions for the future? Say if the US economy does collapse, where are we with the development of crypto and new financial infrastructures to sustain whatever it is that might come?
I hope it doesn't collapse. So there's a book called Sovereign Individual. So it talks about like what happens after everything falls apart. And the idea is that like we'll be able to take care of ourselves. The individual will sort of be like core to this component, but then also like having community backing. Is crypto ready to sort of take this stuff on? No, because crypto is still getting hacked to a certain extent. This past week, somebody accidentally paid like $23 million in ETH gas fees. So you still have like you still have these like little mistakes. Compound, a crypto company, sent a bunch of money to like the wrong people and they had to like tweet out, okay, give us our money back. Like that was a mistake. The bones are being built, but the muscle isn't strong enough yet. And so I think if society did collapse tomorrow, there would be a lot of scrambling and potentially like the economy does best during wartime. So I think crypto could pull it together and be like, okay, we got to do this, we got to do that. But I don't think it's ready yet to be a society.
That's fascinating. Oh my gosh. I have one last fun question. Sure. If you were not Kyla today, like you don't have the current obligations, but you were just to independently build a decentralized product, what would it be? Whether it's like forming a DAO or like creating an NFT or just another startup idea, what would be something that you'd be excited to bring to life?
Yeah, so like my company, I'm probably going to DAO it. It's going to be like a corporation, but it's also going to have a DAO component because I want people to be involved with like building the future of financial education. And that's what I'm hoping this will end up being. So it's kind of like a Duolingo, Investopedia, Khan Academy combo, like a Candyland board where people can like onboard where they need to and just go through like this entire financial solar system. And so I really want to have a DAO around that where people are like, well, okay, so let's develop some content around like maybe they're really into like niche things like farmland. I don't know a lot about farmland. So like how can we like sort of have people teaching themselves, teaching others, like having more people sort of enter this creator economy. And so I think a DAO sort of structure would be super fascinating for that. I kind of cheated because I've already been thinking about it, but yeah, that'd be what I want to build.
It sounds awesome. I'm excited and best of luck on your journey.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for talking with me. I learned so much, and I think especially because you're actually living in it and these concepts really mean a lot to your day-to-day and your actual life. I think I got a whole new perspective.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. This is great.
That was Kyla Scanlon. You can find her on Twitter at Kyla Scan, subscribe to her on Substack at kyla.substack.com, or you can watch her on YouTube or find her virtually anywhere. If you liked this episode, tell a friend about it and hit that subscribe button. I'd also really appreciate if you leave a review. If you have feedback or ideas for topics or guests to bring on the show, please email me at annie@hellometaverse.fm. Thank you for listening. This is your host, Annie Zhang, and I will see you next week.